Hello and welcome to another episode of R&R's Ask the Expert. I'm Kayla McGowan, editor-in-chief, and today we're picking up where we left off at the experience on our mold roundtable. I'm joined today by Doug Hoffman, co-founder and CEO of Normie, Doc Shane, chief mycologist for Priority Lab, and Bret Sallee, national trainer for Goldmore USA. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to see you.
Here.
Good to see you. Feels like we just kind of saw each other, right? Small world, time flies when you're
Yeah.
having fun. And in the first roundtable, we really dove into the technicalities and the science of mold remediation. And we had a question in the audience, and he wanted us to kind of give him the resources or some more information at the technician level or in field level. And so we came together and we thought, okay, let's kind of tackle these same questions at the technician level to make sure that we're setting up our field frontline service individuals for success. And so, our plan here for everybody watching is to continually provide proper information for the industry. So this is not the end of this. We will continue to touch this topic. If you have any questions, please let us know. We'd be more than happy to address them in future recordings. So first and foremost, how can the industry consistently identify when a mold job requires a system-based approach, and what internal processes can help scope and price these projects accurately across these roles? I'm going to defer this one to Doug and Bret, and then Doc Shane, if you have something to add, feel free. So Doug takes on that question.
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think it goes to the fundamental understanding of how the built environment actually works. And as you know, I came out of the building industry, and so all of our classes are really taught around building science. And one of the places that we start in terms of foundation when you're looking at systemic issues is thinking about the house. I'm going to talk from a residential standpoint, but thinking about the house as a living, breathing organism. That's number one. Things that are in that house move throughout the house. I think I've used the illustration before. If you burn popcorn in the kitchen, you're going to smell it in the bedroom. So if you think about mold, even if your situation is a condition 3 where you've got visible mold somewhere, the reality is that those spores have probably been sent throughout the entire environment. And so now you've got a condition 2 in the entire environment, not just in that one spot where you have the problem. So truthfully, Kayla, we look at virtually every residential situation as being a systemic issue. That's easy to prove with testing because you can take swab samples throughout the environment and you can find similar spores throughout the entire environment. So that's the way we approach it. We assume that it's a systemic issue and needs to be dealt with systemically, and that requires not only a good remediation process, but then even when you're finished with the remediation process, making sure after you've torn down containment that you've sanitized the entire environment. I think that's the best way to approach the question in regards to systemic issues.
I agree 100%. Bret?
Yeah, no, totally agree with what Doug's saying there. And so, when it gets down to brass tacks, now that, a technician or an inspector, however you have your company figured out, get out there, how do they approach that? Obviously, if you've got a little patch of mold the size of a baseball, that's probably going to be a different outcome than more of a systemic issue like Doug's talking, which that needs to be determined. And so one of the things we stress in our training with Goldmore companies is, act like a mold detective, as it were. You've got to approach every job with that thought process. Like Doug was saying, figuring out what's going on. And so that may be something as seemingly simple as having obviously a good conversation with the homeowner. They're the ones that have been in that environment for a long time, so you can get clues there. But really, just having a checklist, things to go through. Mold contamination at some level started with a water event, a moisture event. So going through some type of a checklist of what to look for. Mrs. Jones, the homeowner, she may know of a problem with water intrusion, but she may not know of every problem. So we still have to go through our process and check these things if we want to do in my opinion, a thorough job, so that we can make sure we catch it all. Because quite likely, like Doug was saying, it has spread throughout the environment already, long before we get there. And if we just concentrate on that one little area because that's what we see. All that invisible, quote unquote, invisible stuff is going to, bite us all in the backside eventually.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I would definitely say that's where Doc Shane comes in, right? He's actually familiar with the science and the types of spores and all of that. So, Doc Shane, can you kind of explain the importance of looking at, multiple areas for sampling, if you will?
Yeah, one of the things I completely agree with is that we do need to know the building envelope better. That's of paramount importance, and not enough people understand that. Also, we have to understand that what homes are. Homes are not built and sited to prevent the entry of anything. Um, so mold is a component of every home, and the disadvantage of a remediator is that they don't know what the baseline mold burden of that home is. And it changes a lot with how the furnishings, they have dogs, they have cats, they have people, uh, other dirty little creatures like kids that come in and out. So testing becomes a really hard thing to do, but you do need to have, where I totally agree, you need to have a systematic approach. You need to understand um, what you're doing and why you're doing it, because if you test, you will find something. And that's not the goal. The goal is, what are you going to find and how much? And what do you want to return it to?
Yeah, that's really key too, because I think a lot of people, when they hear the word mold, especially consumers, it's sheer panic, right? They don't understand what's a normal level. What is normal mold? Where does it come from? How does it grow? They don't know any of that. And for us to take the opportunity to really take advantage and look at the entire building envelope and do testing and sampling and then work with somebody like Doc Shane and Brett and Doug to come up with the right words to share with your customer, right? And even to your technicians too. Sometimes we see all these really big words. Well, what does that mean? Right? I like to say that a lot because sometimes I see words and I'm like, what the heck does that mean? Like, I know it's an industry word, but what does it truly mean? And I think that around mold, that is very true, right? Especially with the different types. You see all these words and it's scary, but if we take the moment to understand what is an acceptable level, right? Because to your point, Doc Shane, you have people coming in and out of your home, especially your kids. It rains, we have wind, dust, pollen, all of these things end up in your home, and it can become a problem. So I think it's important to first and foremost understand what we're looking at and how to explain it to not just our teams, but our customers as well. So, kind of segueing into that, we have some collaborative tools, testing methods, and follow-up protocols. What are you guys seeing in the industry right now that help ensure some type of long-term success? And how are you tracking the reliability over time? Brett, I'll kind of toss this one up to you, and then we'll go over to Doug and Doc Shane.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously a lot of tools that are and have been on the market, and many of them are very robust in terms of pre or post testing. I think one of the new, relatively new, I should say, uh, processes out there is using particle count reading. It's been in usage for decades in outdoor air quality, and even the World Health Organization and International Standards Organization have set up standards for clean air with particle count reading. But now we're seeing that's something that is available for the indoor environment too. We use a lot of that in our Goldmore companies, using some different pieces of equipment like X-Tech and Particles Plus that give us a really good baseline too in particle count reading. And that's something that whether we use that or mold sampling, like the typical lab report, maybe an aerosol or another brand of a cassette type situation, that's something that we can then do ongoing. I think we mentioned that in Vegas, or one of the panelists mentioned that is coming back, in weeks or months even, and doing a follow-up. We should, if we've educated the customer on how to control their moisture, we shouldn't see a rapid degradation in that air quality. And of course, we can provide that service in an ongoing way to monitor that air quality going forward.
Yeah, great points there, Brett. Doug?
Yeah, Kayla, when you asked this question, I thought of two things that just kind of hit me right between the eyes in terms of long-term success. One is including the homeowner or the occupant in the process. Now, that's an education process, but we have a list of 36 things that we think they need to do to keep a cleaner, safer, healthier environment. And truth is, if you can have the best filter in the world, if they don't change it, they're going to have a problem. So some of it is really left up to them having the right kind of maintenance on their air conditioning system, making sure that if they see water anywhere, they immediately clean it up. So there are things that they can do. I think partnering with the homeowner, that homeowner is one of the most important, I think, components to long-term success. And that's not easy to do, and it's an education process, but it's also based on a relationship that I think you've created by creating a cleaner environment for them. The second thing that hit me was the monitoring concept. We have fantastic real-time monitors now. I've got one in my home, I've got one in my office. On my phone app, I can see the temperature, relative humidity, carbon dioxide, PM 2.5. I can see it all right on my phone. And so constantly monitoring what's going on gives the homeowner the ability, if they're monitoring it, gives them the ability to catch a problem before it becomes a problem. Isn't that a novel idea?
Yeah, proactiveness, right? I think we've talked about preparation and proactivity just in general. And I think, let's leverage the technology that we have, right? Take that moment to show them what app or products to have in their home and say, hey, if things start to change on these numbers, you should probably give us a call so we can come in and assess for you, right? And Doc
Right.
Shane, on your side of things, testing is always important throughout the process, but maybe for people listening, to Bret and Doug's point, how often should you follow up test after you've successfully remediated? Is there a standard to that?
There's not, and thank you for leading me right to where I wanted to go. Uh, there are no standards. There needs to be more standardization in terms of the kinds of things we use. I mean, take particle counters, they're not standardized. They have their own problems, and no single thing should be relied upon. But what we need is a way to, because never forget, I mean, we all know this, it's not unspoken, I'm going to speak it. We're here to serve our clients and in the best way possible to save them money and problems. And so I believe that the industry needs more standardization in types of things that they test with and understand what they do. And uh, how do we keep from making errors and understanding the errors? Because nothing exists anywhere in the world as a golden spike. Like this, take this pill, your problems are solved. You're going to love everybody forever. It can't happen. So education is really important. And for this group that are listening to this podcast, really important to understand the limitations of what they're doing, their tools. But I would like to see, go back to more pressure on laboratories to standardize things because they're not standardized. So if you use different labs, different remediation companies, you're going to possibly get completely different answers and ideas. So I would say that you need to pressure labs to get together and standardize more things to make everybody on the same page. Because Bret mentioned PM 2.5, that's standardized. PM 2.5, PM 10 outside, those things are known and they're standardized. People can rely on them, like radon, like asbestos. So the mold is a little bit more of a moving target, but we do need more standardization to serve our clients better.
Yeah, 100%. I would definitely say too, this even goes down to the maintenance of your equipment too, right? I think we've seen that, Bret, Doug, I know you guys see it all the time where, company A could be using this equipment, company B is using the same equipment. One has maintained company one or one maintained equipment and the other doesn't. And so they're getting completely different information, right? And to Doc Shane's point, I think this is a collaborative effort from the contractor side of things, from the lab side of things, and from standards bodies. Honestly, I think it's a collective effort to kind of make that standard of care, if you will, bar move that needle so that we're setting expectations not just for the industry but for our customers, right? And then we're all speaking the same we're using the same equipment and maintaining things properly. And then when it comes to follow-up testing, whether it's 30, 60, 90, 120, whatever it is, amount of days to come back and follow up and just make sure that you guys have actually tackled everything, or maybe there's another problem that's happened in that window that you guys need to address. I think that's extremely important. So this kind of leads down to we see like frequent breakdowns in communication. It is no secret. Anytime you have any customer service, multiple teams working on things, there can be a breakdown in communication during the process of remediation. So how does cross-functional training and shared protocols help prevent that breakdown in communication? I think you guys have all mentioned keeping the customer in the loop, right? That's detrimental. But what about with your teams, or maybe even sometimes I know we have to sub workout, what does that look like for you guys, Doug?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the key word there, I think, is communication. Communication. And so the two things that popped into my head when you asked that question was one, making sure that everyone, all the professionals are speaking the same language. And number two is that they're all understanding and utilizing the same SOPs, standard operating procedures, same protocols. If I went out tomorrow and bought a McDonald's franchise, I'm not going to be able to go in there and put my grandmother's apple pie. That's a standardized process. They do it the same way every time. That's what you're purchasing is that franchise model, a system, a way to do it correctly. And I think to my way of thinking, of course, being an educator, my way of looking at it is if I can train all of these guys to think the same way, to utilize the same kind of language, to utilize the same kinds of practices, that's going to be a winner. You probably know our basic initial training course for licensing is the CMA CMR, assessor and remediator in the same classroom. Why? Because they need to know what each other's doing and they need to speak the same language. And then we've developed this professional practices document, which supports the S520. The whole point of that is here's the protocols that you should use step by step, 36 steps to a successful remediation, 13 steps to a successful assessment. When you can standardize that, man, all kinds of great things happen.
100%. Brett, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I go along with that totally. It's a lot of it is about excuse me, training. The customer, the homeowner is important, but also again within our companies. I do the national training for Goldmore, and so I train every company and the personnel that use our products and our processes. And we require that with Goldmore. And it's all free, of course, for our companies. But the important point is to have everyone trained. And that's difficult with the inboarding and outboarding of people in our industry, our labor. Sometimes we get a lot of turnover. But when we have a system approach and then we can train everybody, and that might even include office staff, not necessarily just technicians, so that when they're communicating with the customer or even a potential customer, they know the right things to ask because they understand the process, at least to a certain degree. And so then also from our standpoint, boots on the ground type of thing, providing ongoing support so that a company does have an issue out in the field, or maybe they come across something that, wow, how do I approach this? They can call us up and get some guidance there too, so that we can be more standardized. Because to the point of these gentlemen, it's really hard to get the same result that you want every time, the best result, if you're not following the same process every time, where it's just kind of a hit and miss. And so again, a lot of it goes back to training and having that system in place that you can follow.
Yeah, and I would definitely say to your guys' points is, utilize the network in the industry too. You don't have to know everything, right? I think we're all serial students here. We're always learning. We're always asking questions. You know, things evolve, whether it's processes, procedures, even thoughts or the way we use things, it's not an end all be all in that moment. You can call somebody and ask them a question, and they can more than likely still steer you in the right direction. And that helps with, not having a breakdown in communication or lead to frustrations, or, you don't ever want to see your customers see that you don't know the answer on your face. You don't have to say it, but you can definitely tell when someone is really questioning what's going on, right? By the look on their face. And so it's really important to not only leverage training, education, but also leverage the network. I feel like that's one of the most valuable pieces you can have in real time in the field, right? Is utilizing and leaning on your fellow professionals, but also those who have trained you. I think every trainer I've met in this industry is so open to being contacted at any given time so that they can help you solve problems real time. They don't want anybody to get stuck in the field. That's one thing I really appreciate about you gentlemen on this call is I know if I have a question, which there has been a time where I called Doug and I said, "Hey, do you know about this product?" Like, I don't I've never seen it, and he'll be the first one, or Brett or Doc Shane. I know you would tell me, "Hey, I don't know that answer, or I haven't heard of it. Let me find out." Right? And so that's the important thing about, communication just in general, whether it's breaking down or training or education, lean on those who are in the field with you, right? We're in this together, no matter what companies we work for, the end result is the same. We're serving the customers to the best capacity that's possible, truly. So this kind of leads me to the next thing. We kind of talked about standards, processes, and procedures, and Dr. Gavin couldn't be here today, but he did mention the Bergman Amendment, which, really emphasizes the S-520 and, how it's handled in DoD facilities and privatized military housing. And the reason why he brought that up is because it's kind of setting a standard, if you will, right? It's not only intended for military, but maybe down into residential and commercial, where this is intended to create consistency in how we are identifying mold and how we're remediating across really every single project. This particular amendment just focuses on military. But how does this, really make a difference in our industry, not with just efficiency, but safety and client outcomes? Doc, I think I'm going to start with you on this one because you mentioned this briefly. There is not really a set standardized process, procedure, testing, or what have you. How much would this help the lab side of things if we were able to implement something like this across all 50 states?
Well, that's a huge question.
Yeah.
The problem are standards. Until we have a unique problem, if you want to look at it that way in America, we have competition for money, for clients. That drives mistrust. And that's why I like this group. We need standardizations. We need labs to talk to each other. We need to pull our data. We need to have a baseline at which we can all agree and say, here's a first world condition that should be a basic right for people that live in America. And this is what we need to achieve. And that way everybody can be talking about the same thing. So it's really important. We're talking about communication. Everybody should be communicating more, but we do need that standardization. So we have a baseline at which we say, okay, the kind of building you have, this is what's achievable, and this is what you need to have. But it's not going to be worth anything if people don't understand how to maintain those buildings. And that's a moving target. We'll never solve that. It's like the old commercial that Fram filter, pay me now or pay me later. Change your filter now or pay me for a new engine. Maintenance is a big deal, but standardization for that first world condition is a must.
Yeah, 100%. I know it is a really big question for everybody here. I know that Doug, and particularly with Normie and IICRC and Change the Air and a couple of other organizations have gone to several states and had success in implementing, legislation changes and even law changes. And it's slow, but it's surely happening. But I think, Doug and probably Brett are really going to say this, the goal is to have it in all 50 states, to your point, Doc, and it'll also influence others in the process to create their own standards so that we're all on the same beat of the drum, same path. and everything in between. So, Doug, do you have anything to add to that and how, maybe this Bergman Act can or amendment can maybe help shift some things in the industry to really, catapult us forward to make a difference?
I do. I'm really excited about this because I'm going to take like a 30,000 foot view of what's happened in the industry since we got involved in 2004. The science is bringing us to this kind of standardization, which I'm really excited about because it's no longer what somebody feels about the environment or what they think about the environment, but through testing processes, we can actually decide, yes, this is a problem, even if it's nothing more than creating a baseline. This is a problem. How do we reduce those contaminations in this environment? So Dr. Gavin and I are going down to Australia. You probably know this, Kayla, in October. And the reason we're going down there is to do a workshop to present the S520 and the norming professional practices to the entire country. Australia is adopting that. The great thing about that to me, and I think the Bergman announcement also does the same thing, is it's moving us closer to a point where we can accomplish what I think Doc Shane has said, and that's a standard way of evaluating the environment even from a lab standpoint. And I'm just excited about seeing that happen. When we created the medical advisory board with Dr. Andrew Heyman, one of the things that he's done for us on our level 4 protocol is he's established very specific testing that they want to see from the healthcare industry. And it's no longer your mold spore trap and a surface sample somewhere. They're talking about high level Hertzme testing, actino testing, endotoxins. My point is that the science is moving in the right direction. We just need to keep up. It's being innovative. I think it's evolving. We need to stay with it.
Yeah, great points, Bret.
Yeah, I agree with a lot that's being said here. I think one of the big challenges that we see is there is a difference between, legislation and standardization. To your point earlier, Kayla, for example, the asbestos and the lead paint, industry, very legislated. You have to do this. You have to do it. You have to reach this level. We don't have that yet in the mold industry. Now we do have standards out there, and standards are important. But any well-written standard, and I've been in the construction industry all my life, we had standards with that, with building materials. Any well-written standardization is subjective by nature. Even the S520, as good of a standard as it is, it says right in there that the technician has to make determinations on how to do a project to reach the goal, and then may even need to deviate from this standard. So, that's part of the problem too, is oftentimes I come across, especially boots on the ground professionals, and sometimes even people in the assessment part of it, who don't know what the standard says. They've heard it quoted, well, it says that, but does it really? So whatever the standard is where we're at, or if they make legislation, it's incumbent upon us then as professionals at every level in the process to be familiar with it, to read it ourselves, to dig into it, to understand it, because ultimately then that's going to be on us to implement it.
Yeah, and I would definitely say this also echoes the importance of communication within our industry, right? Because we know it takes time to write standards as well, right? So for you guys being boots on the ground or educating, things may change. There may be a new process, a new product that has changed in between those revisions. And it's our job as industry professionals to communicate and come to some type of agreement to make sure we're steering people down the right path. Because, you know, standards are great, legislations are great, but to your point about asbestos, lead, those are actually regulated. I mean, there's OSHA, there's NIOSH, there's all of these things that are put into those particular instances, but not for mold. And for us to get there, we have to have the science, to Doug's point. We have to have the standards. We have to have our industry come together on several levels, from healthcare to labs to technicians to owner operators, even to our vendors who are providing us the equipment for us to actually evolve and catapult forward, to be able to maybe get some of this stuff into legislation and maybe have people like OSHA or NIOSH, kind of help us with regulations and standard operating procedures. I have faith that we'll get there. And this is where this all starts, right? These conversations. I know we've been talking for quite some time, but I do have one last burning question because this has all been great information. But again, it goes back to client education, professional education, and training. So, how do industry professionals approach client education around mold risks, especially when balancing transparency with professionalism and avoiding unnecessary alarm? And I think we heard a good kind of take on this during the panel. One of our audience members said he doesn't use the word mold, right? He uses, I believe, the word problem or contaminant to kind of, you know, steer away from the alarms going off in a consumer's mind, right? So, what would your guys' advice be or answer to this question be? I'm going to toss this one back up to Bret.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's obvious we need to be careful. We need to understand our lane, obviously, like we've already talked about. But having said that, we also need to educate ourselves to the degree we do want to speak to our customer about these things. We need to be educated. And so that's important. And that includes educating our people. What are the mold risks versus maybe some of the byproducts of mold that are at risk, whatever the case might be. And so, yeah, being careful. And then I think we touched on this in Vegas as well, having a focused, thoughtful collaboration with industry professionals that maybe have that lane, whether it's a functional medicine doctor or some other type, certainly not promoting any of those necessarily. But if we have people that we can collaborate with and our customer can collaborate with, especially when we get into some of these very seemingly and potentially damaging byproducts of mold contamination, then we're really giving that holistic, I think, that holistic approach. Because I think more so with we're getting into some of these byproducts here, mycotoxins and so forth, even more so than the mold side, we're really dedicating ourselves to helping these individuals, which I think is important if we take that on. And so we want to make sure we have a robust, holistic approach to help them address these things by people who know what they're dealing with.
Yeah, and that's where collaboration comes across different, industries and professions, right? We can find the root cause of the problem, we can treat the problem, but when it comes to the health of the occupants, we rely on our healthcare professionals, like you said, functional medicine, holistic, whoever, we have a network of who we rely on, and that's where Doc Shane also comes in because he's providing us the results of the testing. He's able to tell us, what type of mold we're looking at, and that also can help you ask the burning questions that you have, to communicate to your consumers. So, Doc Shane, what is the importance of actually understanding the results? I know we talked about this briefly in Vegas, but to be able to transparently communicate to your consumer and then maybe even bring in medical expertise if needed, what do those test results show? And how can we interpret them or ask the right questions?
Really hard question to answer because if you deal with health, mold is one of those things that physicians are not trained in. Um, and so, and it's hard to get human subjects, but that's why standardization is so very important so that we all use the same words. Like no one should be using mold and mildew in homes. Mildew does not grow in a home ever. Then you need to put pressure on Johnson and Johnson to take that off their mildicides in the homes because, and that goes back to client education. They're looking for mildew and mold, and you go say, "Well, I'm going to kill all the mold, but what about the mildew?" Well, don't have to worry about that. So that's important. So we're one of the few labs, if not the only lab, that give determinations on because our 2.5 million home database tells us, even though it's still biased, what a baseline is. And again, going back to standards, we need to make sure that backgrounds are known. That's why you'll never hear me say contamination because you can't have a home contaminated. That doesn't fit my definition. Because homes aren't built and sited and maintained to prevent the entry of anything biologic. But I think that if we have words and understandings of those things so that everybody talks about the same thing. Because a lot of times clients are saying, hey, I want to know if I'm going to contaminate the hotel room by leaving my home that's being remediated. And that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is. So uh, that's what my lab tries to do, is to try to mitigate those, or manage those expectations. And if we're all talking the same language, that will be easier to do, because we don't want to be in competition with each other. We want to help each other, because I said it before, it's really important. We have to know what a baseline, first world condition is, and that's what we want to get to, because homes are not hospitals, and we need to understand that. So I guess that's how I'd answer that.
No, I think that's a really good answer because I also think that's a real like a real expectation, if you will. It's not some crazy expectation that we should have. I think that, when we talk about indoor air quality or the health of the building envelope, I think there needs to be a baseline and an expectation set for those who are occupying it or those who are working in the commercial setting, right? Because depending on where you are in the world, those levels will vary, right? I'm in Las Vegas. We have a lot of dust. We've got a lot of construction going on right now. What would be the basis for us right now in this day and age? What would be the basis, whether it's the amount of mold or, dust particles in the air? Like, what does that look like? And then if we look at Florida, that's completely different. And I think that's where we really do need that standardization for a baseline. So when we are looking at a problem, we're able to explain it to the customer and even to our teams. Hey, this is where we are. This is the level that we should be. And it sets a clear expectation for everybody. Doug, do you have any thoughts on what the gentleman had to say here?
Well, I do, and I wanted to go right back to your question about balancing transparency with professionalism. I have a radical suggestion that a lot of our guys kind of react to in a negative way. But I tell our guys, when you're doing an assessment or a remediation project and you're talking to the client, you're trying to educate the client, please don't rely on marketing material. Please rely on the research. There's so much great research out there. Go to Chat GPT if you need to. Ask the question, is there a connection between endotoxin and actinos? It'll give you some phenomenal research that you can then give to the customer. And the radical suggestion is that we recommend to our members every single time they do a project, whether it's an assessment project, sanitization project, remediation project, they need to hand the customer a copy of the professional practices. Allow the customer to be educated so that they can hold your feet to the fire and make sure that you're doing the job correctly. That's what my suggestion is on this idea of client education.
Well, I would say that's accountability. I don't think it's a radical expectation, if I'm being quite honest. We've talked a lot about being on the same page, standardization, and I think it does start with accountability, right?
I
Show your
do.
customers, show your team what you're making your processes and procedures based around, why you're using the products you're using, why you use the network you use. I think that it's important to really self-reflect. For us, this is a time to self-reflect and see how we can push forward, not just now, but in 2026 and beyond. And I think that some may think that's radical, but I think that's realistic. I think that's accountability. I think the gentlemen here are shaking their head in agreement as well, because someone has to hold us accountable, right? And if we're providing the right materials to the consumer or IAQs or whoever, they are allowed to hold us at a standard of accountability, and we should expect nothing less, right?
That's exactly right, Kayla. And I say it over and over again. Never be afraid or embarrassed about doing the right thing.
That, that's
100%.
that's right, and you said it so well. We need to hold the testers accountable, because with a standard, because so many of our clients, and I'm going to be really unpopular among some of the clients for saying this, but they'll go in and take one inside sample in a 5,000 square foot house and one outside, and expect us to play doctor. That that can't work. That's not accountability. You need to say, no, here's the standard, and here's the square footage, and here's the configuration of the building envelope. You need to know what that is, and here's the standard of care that you need to provide for me. Otherwise, you're not doing any good.
Yeah, and I think to your point too, I love that point, Doc Shane. I know we're kind of running over time, but I would definitely say to everybody's point here is, when we talk to somebody in the industry, their standard may differ from our standard and so on and so forth, right? Because we're making these internal standards ourselves, but we need to work to make one for the industry. And I think that it goes back to documentation, right? I think we hear this all the time. How many photos do you take per room? How many samples do you take? I mean, the list goes on, and we have to start setting those expectations and those standards, right? And the reason we need those is for not only the labs, but for our consumers and to solidify and justify the work that we've done, right? That we've done it right. And then also with, post testing later down the road, I also think that helps us solidify the job that we've done and continuing to take care of our customers. And that is not marketing, it's just great customer service, if you will, right? Follow up with your customers in 6 months and say, hey, we just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Do you feel like the problem has been resolved? If not, we'll come in and we'll do a free assessment or whatever the case may be. And I think maybe that's a conversation for the next time we meet. But I'd really like to thank all of you guys today for taking the time to address some of the questions that we had in Las Vegas and, give those answers to our industry. And, we welcome any other questions that you guys may have in the future. We'd love to address them and make sure that we're providing you the resources and the proper information that you need to be in the field and just better your business and processes and procedures. I'd like to thank all of you gentlemen for your time today. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see you again.
Thank
And
you.
as always, take care and thank you for watching this episode of Ask the Expert.